The public has been conditioned to look to the sky, to fear the arc of a ballistic missile. This is a calculated misdirection. The kinetic cost of a traditional nuclear exchange is prohibitively high for a weakened state. The real vector of attack is not a warhead. It is systemic, silent, and aimed directly at the global financial architecture. The primary asymmetric liability of a global superpower is its total dependence on data flow. A single specialized submarine can sever the undersea fiber optic cables that carry 99% of all intercontinental data traffic, including trillions in daily financial transactions. This is not warfare. It is an act of economic gravity. The objective is not destruction, but a forced global liquidity freeze. Simultaneously, the second vector is triggered in low Earth orbit, satellite blinding, a distributed low-cost swarm of micro-projectiles designed not to destroy, but to obscure, rendering GPS, communication, and surveillance assets inert. The result is not a bang, but absolute silence. A digital blackout. This creates the scenario strategic analysts at CSES call the blind Leviathan, a nation with unparalleled kinetic power, but its nervous system has been severed. It is deaf and blind, operating on automated launch-on warning protocols that can no longer distinguish a system glitch from an attack. When faced with engineered collapse, as interventionist policies discussed by Fair Observer and Euromaidan Press suggest for nations like Iran, the target's final move is to trigger this condition. Their collapse becomes a mathematical certainty for a global zero-sum solvency crisis. The motive is not conquest. It is engineered insolvency. The primary vector of attack is the target nation's balance sheet. By prolonging a conventional conflict, the aggressor's strategy is to transform the war into a terminal solvency crisis for the adversary, forcing a cascade of domestic liabilities. This is a mathematical certainty. According to analysis from CSIS, a protracted unpopular war becomes a catastrophic domestic liability. The constant drain on capital and manpower erodes the state's financial viability and its social contract with the population. The state begins to default internally before it ever loses on the battlefield. When a nation's conventional power is dismantled and its economic solvency is extinguished, its strategic calculus is stripped to a single variable. The threshold for deploying its ultimate asymmetric liability, its nuclear arsenal, is lowered dramatically. Weakness becomes the primary accelerant for escalation. This forces a pivot. The objective shifts from winning a kinetic war to triggering a global zero-sum event. The deployment is not intended to defeat an army, but to detonate the world's financial system. It is the final, desperate act of a bankrupt state, converting its last remaining asset into a global solvency crisis. The kinetic cost-exchange ratio has inverted. According to analysis from the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, a $5 million main battle tank can now be neutralized by a $500 FPV drone. This is not a tactical anomaly. It is the blueprint for the democratization of violence. Lethal capability is no longer monopolized by state-level capital expenditure. It has become a consumer-grade commodity. This asymmetric economic leverage allows an aggressor to systematically liquidate an adversary's conventional assets at a near-zero marginal cost, mathematically accelerating their trajectory toward a systemic solvency crisis and forcing them to consider their final financial liability, the nuclear trigger. The engineered collapse of a nation is not tested on the primary target. The kinetic and economic cost is too high. Instead, strategists require a gray zone, a proxy laboratory to refine the blueprint of systemic failure with plausible deniability. These are not random hotspots of chaos. They are staging grounds. Analysts at RUSI note that regions with specific resource value and pre-existing social fractures are selected to test destabilization vectors. The objective is to measure the precise inputs required to trigger a solvency crisis, or grid failure. Official warnings, such as those reported from nations like South Africa or even Canada regarding foreign interference, are not the cause of instability. They are the data points. They are the system's fever, confirming the pathogen has been successfully introduced. The playbook perfected in these labs is then slated for deployment against primary adversaries. Fair Observer has published analyses calling for decisive intervention to manage an Iranian collapse. The methods for achieving that collapse are not improvised. They are rehearsed. The strategic objective, confirmed by outlets like Euromaidan Press, is a controlled demolition with predictable outcomes, a crash in oil prices to defund adversaries like Russia. The public-facing justification, as Vocal.media reported, involves warnings over human rights to build consensus for strong action. This is a mathematical certainty. By perfecting the mechanics of economic and social collapse in these gray zones, the aggressor gains a high-confidence model for pushing a nuclear-armed state toward insolvency, lowering its threshold for deploying the ultimate asymmetric liability. The weakness is the vector, and the laboratory is where that vector is weaponized. The launch-on warning protocol is a systemic tripwire, not a decision. According to strategic frameworks analyzed by institutions like RIWSI, it is a pre-authorized response designed to nullify an opponent's first strike advantage. The logic is irrefutable. If incoming sensor data indicates a massive coordinated nuclear attack, retaliation must be launched before those assets are destroyed on the ground. It is a mathematical calculation of asset preservation under extreme duress. This protocol's primary liability is its absolute reliance on data integrity. Now inject the fog of digital war. A sophisticated cyber attack does not need to create false incoming missiles. It only needs to blind the system. When every radar station, satellite uplink, and sensor network goes dark simultaneously, the absence of data becomes the data. It is the signature of a coordinated decapitation strike. The commander is now facing a zero-sum choice. Option 1, assume a technical failure and risk the kinetic obliteration of his nation's entire retaliatory capability. Option 2, execute the launch-on warning protocol based on the logical inference of a blinding first strike. As a state's conventional power and economic solvency are degraded, a scenario detailed in analyses of an Iranian collapse impacting Russian war funding, its tolerance for this ambiguity approaches zero. Fear is irrelevant. The commander is forced by protocol to launch, converting his nation's terminal weakness into a global solvency crisis. The engineered collapse of a state is not a single event. It is a protocol. Before triggering the primary solvency crisis, a calibration shot is required to measure system fragility. This is a mathematical precursor, a limited, deniable attack designed to test global response thresholds without triggering a kinetic reprisal. Within the next 12 months, expect a systemic attribution impossible blackout at a major European LNG terminal. This will not be a physical explosion, but a cyberkinetic event targeting the port's core logistics software. The objective is not destruction, it is data. The event will measure the velocity of the resulting liquidity shock in energy futures and the political decision latency within NATO. This event serves as a stress test for the much larger energy price shock that RIWSI analysts project would follow an Iranian regime collapse. The aggressor needs to know the exact kinetic cost and cascade potential before severing a primary node like Iran from the global system. The blackout will be framed as infrastructure failure. It is a launch-on warning signal for a coming solvency war. The event is not the crisis, it is the announcement.